Since taking office, President Obama and Vice President Biden have led the United States in increasing governmental efforts toward addressing the epidemic of violence against Native women. These efforts demonstrate a commitment to increasing the safety of Native women by addressing fundamental legal barriers embedded within the laws, policies, and institutions of the United States. While these changes are commendable, much remains to be done to end the human rights crisis that threatens the safety of Native women on a daily basis. All too often, this crisis results in the loss of life, or in many cases, Native women going missing. Legal reforms are urgently needed to bring the United States into full compliance with international human rights law in the context of violence committed against American Indian women. In the Violence Against Women Act of 2005, Congress recognized that the unique legal relationship of the United States to Indian tribes creates a federal trust responsibility to assist tribal governments in safeguarding the lives of Indian women. In light of this governmental responsibility to Indian tribes, we present to the Commission the following recommendations to consider in reviewing violence against Native women in the United States. We hope that the Commission will support and make the following 8 recommendations to the United States. Number 1, enact legislation that contains the Department of Justice's legislative proposal to restore the criminal authority of Indian nations to prosecute non-Native perpetrators of dating violence and domestic violence in Indian country. This lack of recognition of tribal authority is the fundamental legal barrier that denies Native women full and meaningful access to justice. Number 2, fully fund and implement the Tribal Law and Order Act, particularly with respect to bolstering tribal capacity to exercise enhanced sentencing authority, ensure that federal prosecutors share information on declinations of Indian country cases, and provide training for and cooperation among tribal, state, and federal agencies. Number 3, launch a national initiative in consultation with Indian nations to examine and implement reforms to increase the safety of Native women living within tribal lands under concurrent tribal state jurisdictional authority or Public Law 280 states and those similarly situated, including the speedy response to any request by Indian nations for the U.S. Department of Justice to reassume federal criminal jurisdiction. Number 4, increase federal technical and financial support to Indian nations to enhance their responses to violence against Native women. This is critical to ensure tribes have the capacity to keep women safe, specifically providing resources for tribes to assume criminal jurisdiction if Congress decides to pass legislation. Number 5, create a grant program to provide sufficient federal support to nonprofit, non-governmental Native women's organizations to provide effective services including shelters, transitional housing, and rape crisis centers. Number 6, incorporate tribal-specific provisions in sex trafficking legislation, ensuring that Native women are prioritized in research on sex trafficking. Provide tribes with adequate resources to combat the influx of sex trafficking on tribal lands, and train justice officials on how to respond to sex trafficking of Native women. Number 7, develop a national protocol and reporting system for handling and monitoring cases of murdered and missing Native women. And number 8, create a forum for dialogue, collaboration, and cooperation among tribal courts, federal courts, and state courts on the issue of violence against Native women and how the jurisdictional scheme under United States law unjustly discriminates against Native women. Finally, we call your attention to and offer our help and guidance in providing you with additional information on these ongoing human rights violations against Native women in the United States. We encourage you to conduct site visits to Indian nations throughout the United States to further investigate the epidemic of violence against Native women and its implications to the United States' international human rights obligations. We request that the Commission issue a special or country report on how the United States, in consultation and collaboration with tribes, could better protect the human rights of Native women. We also urge the Commission to include information related to this hearing in its press release on this session and in its annual report to the Organization of American States General Assembly. We thank you in advance for your commitment to the human rights of Indigenous peoples and Native women in particular in the United States. Shki.